My name's Katie Nooner, and I am the presenter tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about assessing new farm products and, giving some tools and techniques and tricks to figure out, if a product is right for you, is a right fit for your operation. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, I am Katie Nooner. I'm an ag business and policy field specialist. So I am in Lafayette County, Missouri. For those of you who are not quite aware of where that is in the state, we are about 45 minutes east of Kansas City, between I-70 and the Missouri River. So it's a great county to be in. I've been with Extension now for almost 8 years, and we've really seen in the last few years, probably honestly since COVID, a renewed interest and a renewed passion for people to get back on the farm. They're willing to be a little bit more risky, start some small farm enterprises, some new farm enterprises. I think COVID was a great wake-up call for a lot of people who never experienced going to a grocery store and there not being food readily available to purchase. So I think that was a really good shock in a way, because it made us look at our regional food systems and what we can grow ourselves and think through that a little differently. So we're going to dive into a couple of different topics tonight. And the first thing, we want to do is we want to answer the question of, will it work? So why the relevance of will it work? So why is it important for you to do this in the beginning? We're going to give you some information that we feel like is useful and what you should know when you're trying to determine whether or not a product or a new crop will work for you. And then we also want to share resources of where to find more. So we're just going to get started with some terminology here. And there's two things that I want to talk about as far as terms go. The first is a feasibility study. And we're going to use this term a lot throughout the evening. And what a feasibility study does is that's really the can we do it question of the business. So this is trying to figure out, is it a good idea to make this new product, or is it a good idea to plant this new crop? Is it viable for the area that we live in or for our business model? And does it fit with what we're already doing? So it helps you kind of analyze and outline a lot of different scenarios or maybe ways that you can implement a product or a crop into your existing business and figure out whether or not it's going to be successful. So a lot of times during a feasibility study, you're asking, other people's perspectives, be that, your spouse or a family member or, kind of a neighbor or someone that is already doing it that you really trust, to get their perspective and what they feel like, is a good fit for you, or maybe it's not a good fit for you. That can be helpful insight. And this is really just where you investigate and research and really try to figure out all you can about what you want to do to determine whether or not it's going to be successful. So the business or marketing plan, that's the really how you do it. So you've kind of done this feasibility piece and you've decided that, yeah, I think I can do this. I think I can make this go. But now I need to really figure out the hows behind it. So that's figuring out, the best maybe business structure, or, who's going to do what operationally, how to market. And Taylor Ann talked a lot about marketing last week. So you got some really good insights into marketing. And then it's really figuring out what stage, when you grow, setting some key milestones in a plan to start and manage that business. So it's kind of writing out the plan of how, whereas the feasibility study is looking at the can we do it. So why would you want to do a feasibility study? You're like, I don't need to do that. Like, I've got this kind of figured out in my head and I think we're going to give it a go. So again, like I've got, it's the can we do it? This is like the Bob the Builder feasibility study plan here. So some reasons why you would want to do a feasibility study is, first off, if you're trying to attract outside investors, money, or you're looking to go into maybe a little bit of debt, taking on this new product crop, things like that, you need to make sure that you've demonstrated that you have really done your homework. You've approached your concept in a very business-like manner, and you've really proven that you've got, real ideas with real production methods, marketing techniques, things that are going to make this a reality. So it just really shows that you've done your homework. And it also might help you think around some corners that you might not have thought about when you just think of things in the abstract and you're not really writing things down and working things through a methodical way of measuring whether or not something's going to be successful. So we really feel like, this type of thing, it doesn't have to be, a 100-page document. It can just be a few pages of really working through some key elements of looking at whether or not something's feasible. So there's 4 elements of a feasibility study that we're going to talk about tonight, and we're going to walk through each one of these, and I'm going to give you some tools and resources for you to be able to really dig deeper into each one of these elements, which is going to be technical feasibility, market feasibility, financial feasibility, and the management feasibility piece of it. So now we're going to dive right in. So the first element that we're going to discuss here is the technical feasibility piece. And the objective of technical feasibility is just to confirm, that what you're wanting to produce or what you're wanting to grow can perform given the environment that you are trying to produce or grow it in. And this type of thing looks at things like site suitability, like what your yield potential is, the type of production system that you are wanting to use, and then it's finally going to look at any environmental or regulatory concerns. So with that, we are going to look at our first tool of the evening. So this first tool is called the AgSite. So this is a great tool that assesses your farm. So what you're seeing here on the screen is the AgSite assessment. When you open the homepage here, this is what it looks like. To create an assessment, you just click on this big orange box. Pretty simple, right? So the nice thing about the tool is even if you don't have an exact address, but you know the road that the farm is on, you can just like type in the road name and then city, state, and it'll kind of get you in the general vicinity of where you need to be. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to map your site. This number 3 will ask you to generate an assessment report, and then it's going to give you an approximate acreage for your site. So we're at 74.5 acres. So, okay, so now we're going to view this report, and it's going to open a separate window. And when it does that, I'm just going to turn this to a full screen just so everybody can see it a little bit easier, because I know a lot of you are on devices, so it's hard to see. So this AgSite assessment report gives you a lot of useful information just about the property that your farm is on. So the first thing it's going to do is just give you a geographic summary of the size of the site, the county that it's located in, a legal description. It's going to give you latitude, longitude, and it's also going to give you GPS points. So the next thing it tells you about is the demographics, which is the population within 1 and 5 miles. And then it also tells you persons per square mile, which is kind of interesting. If there's communities close by, it tells you where those communities are. And this is where I think it starts to get a little more interesting from a production standpoint or a technical feasibility standpoint on a farm. The first thing it's going to tell you is there any streams on the farm? So here there's 4,284 feet of intermittent streams. So these are not going to be things that may run water year round. It might just be like a wet weather type of a stream. So it also tells you if you have any wetlands on your property. So there's 3.92 acres of wetlands on this farm. And then it tells you what watershed you're in. So your farm is located in the Gabriel Creek watershed. The next piece is also really helpful for production and technical production is soils. So this is going to tell you the types of soils that are on your farm and how many acres of each soil you have. And you might be thinking, well, that's great information, but if I don't know where these soils are located on my farm, it's not really that helpful. But if you go over here to where it says map and you click on it, it's going to open another window with the farm boundary, and this is an exact soils map of your farm. So all these different shaded colors are telling you the different soil groups that are in your farm. And you can play with the keys on the right-hand side to kind of, fade this in and out. And then you can see, where these different soil types are located. So there's a lot of information, not only in the report, but then that is kind of within the report itself. So we're going to go back to this report. Next thing is going to tell us any endangered species that are located on the property or could be potentially located on the property. Flood hazards. So you do have 8 acres in a 100-year floodplain. The karst geology, which is important to know. So where I am in the state, we have very deep soils. It takes a while to get to rock in Lafayette County. Other parts of the state, the rocks are really close to the surface. So this is going to kind of tell you how much topsoil you might have on your property. So the last information on this summary just has to do with climate. So it talks about precipitation, temperatures, and then the very last piece, I'll try not to make you too dizzy as I scroll, is a windrow. And the windrows, I think, is interesting, and especially from a technical feasibility standpoint, because if you're thinking of, putting in a market garden on your property, and one of the crops that you're wanting to grow is sweet corn. So this windrow here shows kind of wind speeds from the year. But if you click on a month, and if you're growing sweet corn and you want to harvest that sweet corn, late June, early July, and you really want to know what direction the wind blows out of in June, because if you're planting sweet corn, the last thing you want to have happen is a storm blow through when it's just about ready to pick and knock all your sweet corn over. You might want to think about, okay, where would I put a windbreak, in June to help this sweet corn stand, and my prevailing winds are out of the south or the south-southwest. So that's just a way you can use this tool to kind of figure out like the best planting situation for the type of crops that you're wanting to grow. So it then also, last piece of information is where weather stations are, which can be useful to know where the nearby weather stations are. And then the very last thing is just a nice map of the property that we mapped out in the very beginning. And this is sometimes just nice to have that aerial bird's eye view. Because if you wanted to just do a piece of your farm and say, okay, what does 2 acres really look like? You could just map a piece of the farm, where you're actually going to be growing the products that you're wanting to raise. So the next thing that you want to think of from a technical standpoint is, what are realistic yields, or how much can I grow or produce of what I'm wanting to either put in the ground or make with my farm products? There's going to be a lot of factors that play into this. The AgSite tool can help you with your climate, your soils, but whether or not you irrigate is going to really affect your yields. Like, what type of environment are you growing in? Are you going to do some sort of a hoop house, greenhouse, high tunnel situation where you're controlling the environment? And I think a lot of people, when they look at their yields and they start kind of putting pencil to paper and thinking through, they always estimate their yields higher, especially in the first couple growing years. Those first few years, you really need to be honest with yourself and very realistic as to what you are going to produce. And I would say, really kind of underestimate those first years. You have a learning curve to get through. Your yields will probably increase over time. But as you're starting out, you might want to, estimate a little bit low. So the next resource I want to share with you is the Midwest Vegetable Guide. So I'm going to click here on this link so you guys can see what that looks like. And this is the Midwest Vegetable Production Guide. It is a free downloadable resource that has a wealth of vegetable knowledge in it. I'm just going to kind of scroll down a little bit, but you can see the contents. It's 296 pages if you download the whole guide. So a lot of good information, but it does have yield information here. So it will give you production tables and just kind of some average, good, and excellent yields of vegetable crops. I happen to just click on the field growing of vegetable crops. So that's just going to be, growing crops on open ground. They do have some production tables for greenhouse vegetable crops as well. So this is a good resource that will be provided to you. That's just another place to kind of measure some potential yields. So the next piece of technical feasibility is really evaluating your assets. So this is just where you kind of list the things that you have, what you need, and then what I like to call the like to haves. So as you kind of develop these different lists or this kind of chart, this is where you're going to put down, these are the things that I have on hand. These might be the things that I need, and how much are the costs of those things, does it make sense to make these types of investments? And then, the like to haves might be where I scale up to and set some goals for future growth. So we're going to visit a tool that kind of helps you with this asset evaluation here in a moment. So Intel for Ag is the next tool that we're going to kind of test drive for you this evening. And I'm going to launch this here. And this is what the homepage looks like. And for this first piece of Intel for Ag, which is like the Encyclopedia Britannica of vegetable, fruit, even some animal products, it has a wealth of information in it. So it's a great resource to utilize. We're going to go here to the Knowledge Center. So here under fruit and vegetables, we're going to do a drop down, and it's going to give us not everything that's out there, but a good selection of fruits and vegetables that there's information about. So we're going to use cabbage because that's going to be the closest thing to green on here. And the first thing we're going to look at is the production guide. So this really helps with some of the technical feasibility pieces of site selection. It talks about, what sites cabbage likes to grow in. It talks about, what's the soil pH, fertility requirements. It talks about different varieties. And then it gives some recommended cabbage varieties. Talks about, when they mature, head size, lots of different information just on planting and the plants themselves. So the next thing that's here in the Knowledge Center is the Machinery and Equipment Guide. So that checklist that you saw on that asset evaluation slide, this is going to talk about the machinery and equipment needs for cabbage. So, do you need a tractor? I would say maybe, depending on what kind of scale you're growing. Same with a mower and a disc and things like that. But probably even if you're starting on a smaller scale, you're going to need to think about cold storage. Because, if you're growing 25 heads or 250 heads of cabbage, you're going to need a way to keep that product fresh, before you take it to market. So those are types of considerations that I say list, the have to haves, the like to haves, and, kind of go from there when you're doing your feasibility plan. Another thing that I like about the Knowledge Center is this resource list. So if you really want to do a deep dive, we include links to other university publications, and you can really go down a lot of different rabbit holes on really doing some deep dives, some really good research into growing different crops. So the next place we're going to go for the technical feasibility piece of Intel for Ag is looking at sustainable enterprises. And I have to say that the AgSite was kind of one of the precursors to Intel for Ag. So some of the things you're going to see here look a little bit familiar, but kind of a little bit different resources, but there's still going to be some familiarities. So we're going to find my sustainable enterprise, and we're going to use tomatoes as an example. The nice thing about Ag Intel is there's some quizzes built in that can really help you determine whether or not growing a crop is right for you. Then you calculate your score, and like any good quiz, it's going to kind of tell you, congratulations, or and it's going to give you a range. So there's no reason why you should not pursue growing tomatoes. So that's just kind of a nice little test that you got that you can give yourself when you're looking at, different crops, to whether or not it's a good fit for you and what you're wanting to grow there. And then the last piece of Intel for Ag on the technical feasibility side is land suitability. And this is, again, just a way to gauge. This is going to tell you, by selecting a crop, what your land suitability is. So let's look at apples here, and I'm in Lafayette County. Oops. So you kind of zoom in on the map, and it'll tell you whether or not your county is suitable, moderately suitable, or unsuitable to grow a crop. So it's just another tool at your disposal to determine whether or not you have the technical feasibility requirements to move forward with what you're wanting to do. So lots of resources there. And we're going to visit Intel for Ag again shortly, because there's even more tools within that website that we're going to explore. So the last piece of technical feasibility is regulatory considerations. And these sometimes are things that are just like absolutely beyond your control, but it's really important that you check into them, because it can really make or break what you're wanting to do. So the first thing is you need to ask yourself, is my farm properly zoned for what I am wanting to do? So especially if you live in an urban area or within city limits, you need to make sure that if you're needing or wanting to put up a greenhouse, that you are able to do that. The last thing you want to do is invest in constructing a structure and then finding out later that you had to have a permit for it, or the city doesn't allow for that type of a structure where you're at and you have to take it down. So it's important to check zoning regulations, where your property is located. The next regulatory consideration you really need to look into is if you are doing a value-added farm product, you need to know whether or not that product needs to be produced in an inspected kitchen. There is a Missouri cottage law with certain foods like jams and jellies that can be produced in a non-inspected kitchen. However, if you're doing fermented products, if you're infusing honey, those types of products always have to be packaged and produced in a licensed kitchen. So those inspections vary by county. So it's really important to work with your county health department to know what does or does not need to be produced in an inspected kitchen, and just have good communication with them with what you're doing. And then lastly is, do you have access to utilities that you need to produce the product? So, if you're wanting to irrigate, do you have access to metered water, or are you planning on hauling water to where your garden is? If you have electricity, is that something you need to look into? So just making sure that you have access to what you need in order to produce the product not getting it in the ground and then realizing after the fact that, it's a major hurdle or a major expense to add that at a later date. So we are going to zoom along to the next piece, and that is financial feasibility. So here, when you're looking into financial feasibility, it's just really the ability to accurately project what you feel your income and your cash flow is going to be. So you want to be able to sustain what you're doing and meet any debt obligations that you might have. And we're going to give you some tools to help do that. We're going to look at some budgets, some ways to benchmark data, and then we're going to kind of just talk a little bit about financing and some cost share grant pieces as well. So the first thing we're going to talk about are enterprise budgets. So we here in the Ag Business and Policy Group love our enterprise budgets. So we do have some specialty crop budgets, and you can see those on the screen. We've got budgets for high tunnel tomatoes, beekeeping, some hydroponic leafy greens, some microgreens, cut flowers, and elderberries. We are working on some more. I think I saw a zinnia cut flower budget as well. But we don't have budgets available for all vegetable production, but we're more than happy to work with you to customize a budget or, find one that maybe another university has put out, and we can use those budgets as well. So just want to show you where to find our budgets, excuse me. So this is the homepage when you click on the Missouri Ag Budgets link, and we have budgets for all the traditional agriculture crops, beef, corn, dairy, but we're going to look here at the specialty crop budgets in particular. And for tonight, we're going to look at beekeeping. So when you click on a budget, it kind of takes you to a homepage for that budget. There's a PDF that you can download that talks about it, but really where the good stuff is in the Excel file. So all the budgets have downloadable Excel files. And the nice thing about our Excel file budgets is they are completely customizable. So if you have a beekeeping operation and you don't have 10 hives, you have 20 hives, you can just change the numbers in the shaded areas, and the budgets will calculate all the math for you kind of behind the scenes. So I'm not going to change too many of the numbers here tonight just for time, but this really allows you to go in and play and see that, okay, if I get this many more pounds of honey, what does that do to my total income? If I spend this much more on bottles, instead of getting, cheaper bottles, I go for the slightly fancier bottle because it looks really pretty and I feel like it's more eye-catching. What does that do to my operating costs? So it really allows you to customize what you're doing. And then at the very bottom, this piece is really important. It talks about what your income over operating costs are. And then it also talks about your income over operating cost excluding labor. And that's really important because we don't always pay ourselves what we could do if we say went out and got a job elsewhere. So the amount of hours that you're spending working on your farm, you do it because you love it. It's what you want to do. You don't really think of it in terms of, well, I'm spending, 30 hours a week on my farm. If I went and worked at Walmart for $15 an hour, I could make this much. So it includes and excludes later, or when it looks at income over cost, because we want to take out that kind of, I'm going to say, opportunity cost of going elsewhere. So with this budget, if you have 20 hives, it's 60 pounds of honey per hive. Your income over your costs, excluding labor, would be $7,443. So these budgets are great, like I said, to go in and really play with the numbers, change them for your operation. And it really shows you what your income could be. So the next piece of the financial feasibility piece of it is kind of looking at farm financial performance. I really was hesitant to put this in because it's kind of doing a little bit deeper dive into the finance side of things, but I wanted to share with you all up front because I think it's really important to know how your farm is performing. So we're going to talk about this scorecard and kind of the different pieces of it. There's 5 areas of farm financial performance. And if you're starting out or you haven't quite started your business out, these numbers might not look the greatest, but I think it's important for everyone to see what they are and why they're important. So the first piece we're going to look at is liquidity. So that just answers the question, is the farm able to meet financial obligations as they come due? So as the bills need to be paid, do you have the capital to be able to pay them? The next is solvency. So can the business pay all of its debts if you sold it tomorrow? So sometimes businesses aren't solvent in the first few years because you have a lot of upfront, debt. You might have to buy a lot of equipment. It takes a while to get things off the ground. So don't let that, be concerning if you're kind of still new to business, but you definitely want to be solvent as you move, into 5+ years of being in business. You want to start to be able to cash flow and start to become more solvent as time goes on. Profitability. So this is just the difference between the value of the goods you're produced and how much it costs to produce them. So we're going to talk about price here in a little bit. So it's really important to price what you're selling so that you can be profitable. So the 4th is repayment capacity. That's just the ability to repay term debts on time. And then the last piece is financial efficiency. And that's just how effectively the business uses its assets to generate income. So there's a lot of calculations that go behind these different ratios. We will share a way to do all those calculations and then what the different ranges are for caution, which would be the red. Yellow is you need to maybe think of this, and then green is good. So as you better your position, your financial position, it's important to kind of monitor where you're at on these scorecards to see what areas might need to be improved or places where you're really strong. So the other side of it that's really important is if you ever go to a lender because you need a loan or a line of credit for your business, they are going to run these ratios. So they're going to ask you for your balance sheet, your financial statement, and they're going to take all that information that you provide. They're going to crunch these numbers. It's really not fun to be surprised at the bank. So if you've done some of these ratios ahead of time and you know where your financial positions are, it will help you explain why maybe you need a line of credit or why you're needing a loan. You might have a little bit of a solvency problem, but you're expecting to be able to remedy that within this amount of time. It just allows for a more transparent, better conversation with that lender. So, and that's a great kind of dovetail into our next slide, which is our external sources of capital. So this is where you can go if you need, cash to help your business. So the first place is lending institutions. So Farm Service Agency has some great microloan programs and some very attractive loan rate programs available to farmers. Obviously, your traditional bank and credit union, farm credit service, places like that are great places to go and inquire about loans and lines of credit. The next kind of source of capital sometimes can be cost share programs. These are generally administered through Natural Resource Conservation Service with the USDA, or in Missouri, we have the state soils and parks tax, which funds the Missouri soil and water districts across the state. So cost share programs are kind of like reimbursement programs. So I'm going to use an example of a pollinator habitat. So say I go and I cost share with NRCS for a pollinator habitat to help with my honeybees. So I pay for that habitat up front. I sign a contract with them. I implement the habitat, and then they reimburse me for a portion of the cost, be that 20 or 30%. So in that contract, I have to sign that I will maintain that practice for a certain amount of time. So it might be 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, whatever they determine is the life of that practice. I have to make sure that, I keep that pollinator habitat healthy. So that's kind of how a cost share program works. The last piece is grants. So I'm only going to talk about USDA and Missouri Department of Ag. Those are the two agencies that we deal most with here in Extension. There may be other grants out there from other funding agencies, but keeping up with grants is like herding cats. It's just, there's a lot out there and there's a lot of information. We do have a really helpful guide sheet that lists a lot of the USDA and Missouri Department of Ag grants, what they will fund, and some description of projects. So that's a great guide sheet if you want more information about grants. Grants are generally not for production related activities. You see them more for value added pieces of farming, and then also for scaling up certain operations. You're most likely not going to see a grant for you to go, till barren dirt and plant a produce garden for the first time. But you might see a grant to put in a commercial kitchen or expand refrigeration because you are expanding, growing your business, things like that. Grants are generally done on a match where you might bring, 25% to the table. It'd be a 25% match and the grant would pay for 75%. So the next piece, so we're on number 3 of 4, in looking at our different feasibilities, is market feasibility. So I'm going to kind of maybe hit on some things that weren't hit on last week. I know last week is a lot of social media and, really intense marketing strategies. We're going to talk a little bit more generically and a little bit broader with market feasibility. So if everybody can think back to like their high school marketing class and the 4 P's of marketing, we're going to talk about product, place, price, and promotion. So, with marketing, it's really important that you identify the target market and who's going to buy your product, how much of it do you think that they're going to buy? So how much do you need to grow? How stable is your market? Are you looking at a market that's open 4 months out of the year, or is it open year round? You kind of have to think of the timeliness of what you're doing. Assessing customers and their needs and preferences. Sometimes it's not about what we want to do, but it's about what the customer wants. The customer is always right? I worked in retail for lots of years, and no, the customer is very, very rarely right, but that's a different argument for a different day. And then who are your competitors and just some pricing trends. So we're going to kind of walk through a couple of tools here on the market side. So the first thing I want to share with you is the specialty crop price discovery. It can be really hard to know where to price your product. We kind of talked a little bit earlier about making sure we're covering the cost of production, and that's really important. But you also want to make sure that you're not leaving, any additional meat on the bone, and you want to get as much as you can for your product. So there's a tool that the USDA puts out, and I'm going to share that with you here. And it is their market pricing for specialty crops. So this is a great place to go to kind of get some ideas on what you should be pricing your products at. So there's 2 reports that you can pull here. You just kind of scroll down and then there's standard reports. We're going to talk about the terminal markets here in a minute. But for now, we're going to look at retail. So it opens in a PDF, and it just is going to take 1 second here. So, and this is a national retail report for specialty crops. So these retail reports pull data from advertised like weekly circulars from grocery stores. They pull from over 500 stores or retailers, with over 30,000 actual physical store locations. So a lot of data is going into this. They kind of aggregate it and they give you some pricing. So we're just going to look here at baby peeled carrots in 1 pound bags. So this week, the average price was $1.37. Last week it was $1.36. So this is just kind of a baseline for where your prices should be. I would say even if you could grow carrots and your cost of production was 40 cents, you probably shouldn't be selling, below, maybe what the grocery store prices are. You kind of want that baseline for your product, if that makes sense. So they've got a lot of different commodities here. It also tells you the units in which they sell them. Is it a pound bag, a bunch, sweet corn? It gives you an option of trays with 4 to 5 ears. That's kind of good information to know too, from a marketing standpoint, because that's how your customer is used to seeing that product sold. So they understand that, okay, a 1 pound bag of carrots will last me this many days. So it's just kind of a way they can easily determine, okay, how much of your product do I need to buy to get me through however many days until I can come back to market. So the other piece that we're going to look at here in a moment is the terminal price. So this is wholesale transactions at kind of terminal markets. And they kind of conduct interviews to get this information. So this is what these look like. It's a little different format here, and they're selling higher volumes of product. But still, it's kind of interesting to see the data behind what these things are being priced at, at these types of markets and these terminal markets. So some other sources you can go for pricing information. Missouri Department of Ag does have a farmers market price reporting tool. It's a little bit of a hairy Excel file, and you kind of have to do some searching and sorting through it, but it does tell you what different farmers markets are actually reporting prices at. So another place you can go, depending on the produce auction, is there could be an opportunity to get produce auction data. We do have several produce auctions around the state. Only thing with produce auction data is, you might have to scale it to your operation. They're selling a lot larger quantities. And then if you're in Eastern Missouri or kind of on the fringes of, Southeast Missouri, Kentucky does have some price reports from Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee, just seeing what maybe some neighboring communities are doing that are just across state lines from you can be helpful too. Okay. We are going to visit our friend Intel for Ag one last time here. Actually, we're going to visit it one more time after this. And we're going to go here to the market intelligence piece. And this has some really good information in it. So again, we love maps. So we're going to enter a location. So we're going to go to Branson, Missouri, and we're going to drop a pin. We're just going to go right here to downtown Branson and drop a pin there. And when you click, it's going to open a new window and it's going to pull up a market intelligence report. So it's going to do some thinking here for a few seconds. So the first thing you're going to be able to do is when you get this market intelligence report generated is you're going to be able to select a radius that you're wanting to look at. So it defaults to 30 miles. If you live in an urban area, a highly populated place in the state, you might reduce the market area and you might go down to 20 or 10 and see what it does. If you're in a very rural part of the state that has a lower population, you might want to increase the market area that you're looking at to try to kind of broaden your population base a little bit. But for Branson, that's a pretty, I want to say that's a fairly densely populated town, especially compared to where I live. So we're just going to go with 30 miles. So the first thing this market analysis is going to tell you is the population of the state of Missouri, the nearest community, and then the market area. So there's 12,000 people in Branson. There's 56,000 people in Taney County within a 30-mile radius. Looking at our market area, 220 1,571 people, because that's including some areas like you're getting into a little bit of, South Springfield and, some a little bit more densely populated areas up north. So it's really interesting to see how many people are in that market area, even versus the county or the closest community that you're in. So the next place thing it's going to talk about is the farmers market. So it's going to list the markets that are close to you, and then it's going to tell you the distance that they are from where you dropped that pin. So gives you the location. It's always a good idea to, kind of do some homework. I just wouldn't show up to the Branson Farmers Market expecting them to be open on Saturday. You want to make sure, can you find a market manager to contact? Do they have social media? Kind of do a little bit of research on the markets and figure out what the best ones are for you. Go to a market before you show up to sell at a market is always a very sage piece of advice. So it also is going to give you other potential buyers. And if you're in that scaling up of your business, you might think, okay, I'm going to start out with my business really small. I'm going to start at the farmers markets, but eventually I want to move out of that space and I want to start maybe selling to some local restaurants, maybe get into some grocery stores that are willing to buy locally grown. Or I want to get into, hospitals, nursing facilities, things like that. It's going to tell you here, there's 87 restaurants in the county. There's 271 restaurants, in that market area. So that's good information to kind of know as to, where your different other potential buyers might be. It's going to give you a demographic analysis talking about, kind of the median household income. So this is kind of interesting, both Branson and Taney County have a little bit lower median household income. Are they going to be the ones that are going to pay more, a higher premium for premium product at the farmers market? Are they looking for maybe, something that's going to be more on par with what they can get at the grocery store, given what their household incomes are? That's where you really use this demographic data to determine, like, where do I put my pricing at? Can I upsell the benefits, or are there other ways I can, attract customers? But in the market area, the median income ticks up a little bit more to be on par with state average. Are some of these markets that are listed above in more affluent communities versus maybe some communities that might have, a little bit less of a median household income? So those are kind of important things for you to research and dive into when you're looking at your market feasibility piece of things. So it's going to talk about race, ethnicity, age. And then the last piece I think is interesting, just because from kind of like a human quirkiness standpoint. So it talks about food demand estimates in the county. So it defaults to animal products. So, estimated animal consumption per pound of beef is 60 pounds of beef and 40 pounds of cheese. And I just find those things really, like, if you like numbers, I kind of find that always interesting to see how much people are consuming. But where I feel like it's helpful for growers on the fruit and vegetable side of things is it kind of tells you what your customer preferences are. So fruits, apples. Apples are probably a little bit harder to grow in Taney County. We can use that map in Intel for Ag to talk about land suitability, but there's probably parts of Taney County that can grow melons pretty well because you've got some sandy bottom soils in certain parts of that county. So, knowing what people like to buy, watermelon's number 2 in Taney County. And then also on the vegetable side of things here, people really like their tomatoes and potatoes, and that's pretty par for the course, statewide in Missouri. But it also kind of talks about some other products as well on the vegetable side of things that are really interesting, just to know, if I'm going to plant a small market garden, I probably want to include some things on this list because those are things that people are used to eating. It's what they like to eat, and it's a quick, easy decision for them. They might be willing to buy cucumbers, but they might be a little bit more hesitant to try something like okra or something that might be not part of their staple, food purchasing. So interesting things. You realize kind of get into the psychology behind what you buy, I think is always really interesting. So the last piece that we're going to talk about tonight is the management feasibility side. And this is where you really have to kind of ask yourself some soul searching questions of, do I have the management, marketing, technical expertise? Am I willing to put the time in and do what I need to do to make the project successful? So you want to look at some different pieces of management. Do you have the available labor? Do you feel like you have enough experience and knowledge to produce and market that good? And then do you have good communication skills? That can really fall into the marketing piece of where you sell. If you don't like talking to people, going to the farmer's market and interacting with people might not be the best choice for you. You might want to look at a different marketing or a different selling outlet there. So we're going to visit Intel for Ag for the last time now, I promise. And they do have a piece here, and our final piece that we haven't looked at yet tonight is the management resilience piece. And this is, again, one of those where you kind of start by choosing the enterprise that you're wanting to do. So we're going to look at, specialty crops here. And it's going to kind of bring up a lengthy quiz. It's 25 questions long, and I'm not going to go through every one of these questions tonight for time. I think I might put you all asleep if I do. But I'm just going to run through this really quickly because what it's going to do is it's going to assess your management skills. So and it's going to do this on a 1 to 5 sliding scale. So you kind of have to think through these questions a little bit more. Can I tolerate carrying inventory? I'm going to say 2. I have a pretty small farm and I don't have a lot of room. I do have, a spouse and kids that can provide me with labor, and they're really good at weeding. So I think I'm going to do pretty good there. Am I comfortable speaking on the phone? Well, yes, I very much am. I talk a lot for work, so I feel like I'm pretty good at talking. Bargaining is a thrill for me. Not really. I don't like negotiating with people or haggling over price. I am very comfortable managing employees. Am I comfortable with a debt asset ratio greater than 50%? No, I'm pretty leery of going into too much debt. I attend farming related seminars. I love farming related seminars. I keep verifiable production and management records. Oh, I do okay. Probably not as good as I should, but better than some. I'm patient while explaining tasks. I think I'm pretty good at that. I was helping my son do math problems tonight before I came here, and some of his word problems I had to think through. So I think I did a pretty good job. My philosophy is you buy it, you own it. Oh, not necessarily. I think the customer, you should be able to work with the customer. I frequently develop cash flow operations. I do that. I enjoy speaking in public. Drought is sort of a concern for me, but I know that I can water if I need to. I know the going rate for hourly labor. I use marketing contracts. Nope. Don't know anything about marketing contracts. I have experience storing crops. Besides my refrigerator, not really. So you kind of go through and mark these with what you really feel like your gut is telling you. No, I'm just going to kind of finish this out really quickly. I don't want to buy extra insurance. And then you calculate your results. So you kind of put all these, questions, answer them to the best of your ability, and then it gives you these scores. So it gives you management competency in production, finance, labor, sales, and marketing. So, and then it kind of gives you a, guideline of, I need resources to grow my skills in categories with scores of less than 35. So I need some production help. I need financial help. I'm really good with labor. I need some sales help and some marketing help. So then it gives you these additional tips and trainings, but it does kind of like gauge where your strengths and weaknesses are. And I think it's really important for us to recognize our strengths and weaknesses, and know where we need to maybe buckle down or beef up, because we kind of sometimes avoid the things we don't like to do. And if you're bad at financials, you can't avoid financials in your business for long before you don't have a business. So it's really important to recognize our shortfalls as well as things we are really good at when we're managers of a business, and be able to seek out help and resources when we need to kind of, work on our skills there. So another piece of management feasibility is asking yourself, can I do this all myself, or do I need to hire employees? And this can be kind of a tricky question sometimes, because it's really important that you sit down and really calculate the amount of time you need to be successful with what you're adding or what you're starting out wanting to do. So if you have an off-farm job, are you able to devote the time that it's going to take to get this business off the ground and running? Are you scaling it appropriately for the time that you have? So sometimes I know I'm guilty of thinking I can accomplish more in a day than I really can. So just making sure you're very conscious of how your time's being spent, and calculating the true amount of time it's going to take you to go to the markets, to load up the van, to go to the market, and things like that. Because I'd love to hear from you, some of you on the call tonight that do sell at the markets. You spend a lot of time just behind the wheel driving. And that's time that sometimes it just is what it is. Can't avoid it. But think of what you could get accomplished if you didn't have to spend that time. So that really kind of dovetails into my next point here is your time as the business owner, manager, being spent in the most profitable way? So if you're out weeding, is your time better spent weeding, or is it researching, product development, building relationships to sell the product? So there is a tipping point when it becomes a better use of your time to pay an employee to weed, and you spend your time and efforts and energies on other activities of the business. And you need to kind of determine that for yourself when that tipping point is. The next point here is, are you comfortable managing and supervising others? Because some people aren't. If you've never had to manage employees, that can be a really like tangled ball of yarn that sometimes isn't much fun. And we like to sometimes just be in charge of everything and be responsible for everything, because no one can do it quite like we can. But you might eventually get to the point where you have to, manage and train other people to do some tasks to free up some of your time, or you're able to grow to a place where you're just not able to accomplish everything that you need to get done. And that's a good thing. Hiring employees are wonderful milestones to have in a business, because that means you are growing and you are doing good things. So lastly, if you do determine that you need to hire employees, there are some costs associated with hiring employees that we don't always think about. It's not just that hourly wage, but it's the taxes that have to be paid on that employee. You're going to need to carry a workman's comp insurance policy if you have employees on your farm. So you really need to make sure that you are figuring the total cost of adding employees and not just that wage piece of it. So there are farm labor resources out there. I'm not going to go to this site. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you've got the link. But this is a great page that we have that has a lot of little short videos that you can watch. Every video on recruitment or hiring, onboarding employees, retaining employees, and terminating employees has worksheets and checklists and templates for job applications or employee evaluations and all of those fun things. But it's a great resource with lots of tools. that can help you if you're thinking of, bringing employees onto your farm. So we covered a lot tonight. We kind of covered 4 areas of feasibility planning. We do have what's called the Small Acreage Planning Guide, and it does walk you through a lot of the things that I talked about tonight. It's a great publication that also summarizes a lot of the tools and resources that I provided to you. So I just want to, recommend checking that out, because it walks you through, defining business goals, income, determining what to produce, some business planning, feasibility pieces, and then we do have some worksheets available for you as well that I'm more than willing to work with you to fill out. So just something else for you to check out. Once you have all of these things pulled together and you've done all this research and all this digging, and you kind of get to the point of it's a go or a no-go decision. So, and if it's go, great. It will make implementing that new product a lot less stressful. You've kind of paved the road, so it's not going to be completely smooth sailing, but it'll be a lot easier than if you hadn't done all this research and forethought and, worked around those corners as things came up that you didn't think about initially, in your research and digging through all this information, to make this whole process a lot smoother. And it also, starts to really dovetail and feed into your business plan. So, it moves you from the can we do it question to the how we do it question, and you can really start planning for getting that business up and off the ground. If you come to a no-go decision, don't feel like that was a complete waste of your time. It's not a bad thing to do all this research and not have a lot of money invested. The things that make me cringe and make my stomach hurt is when I get these calls like, I planted 3 acres of lavender last summer and it all died. Well, it died. You planted it in July. It's, if you would have just done a little bit of feasibility, ask yourself some of these questions and not just kind of dove right in, you would have saved yourself a lot of money, a lot of frustration, and a lot of time spent where it really, physically hurts dollars out of your pocket versus just doing some research and determining that it's not going to be a good decision for me.